Welcome to the Faith Informing Podcast, the podcast where we talk about what informs our faith and how our faith forms us. My name is Travis Jameson, and I'm your host. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Esther Lightcap Meek, a distinguished philosopher and author known for her work on the nature of knowing. She is Professor of Philosophy Emeritus at Geneva College and has written extensively on epistemology, particularly building on the insights of Michael Polanyi. Her book, A Little Manual for Knowing, challenges conventional ideas about knowledge, inviting us to see knowing as a relational, transformative act rather than mere information gathering. In this conversation, we'll explore what it means to truly know, not just facts, but God, the world, and one another. Well, Esther, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
That's wonderful to be invited. I'm looking forward to talking with you, getting to know you, and thanks for sharing me with the people that you talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first heard about your work and thinking about epistemology, I thought, would my audience be interested in hearing something about epistemology? But then I was reading your book and I saw the phrase, covenantal. Oh, what is it? Covenantal epistemology, right? Is that how you put it? Yes.
Epistemology is what
And I thought, I bet you there's a lot there we could dive into. So
yeah.
I'm so glad you're here and just that we can kind of dive into things. And so since my audience wouldn't know you very in particular, so can you share a bit about your background and what led you to explore philosophy and become a philosopher and then focus in on epistemology?
Be happy to. Well, I grew up in a Bible-believing church and family and found myself around age 13 with questions I was sure were sin. One was, how do I know that God exists? And the other is, how do I know that anything exists outside my mind? And I knew they were sin. I felt they were sin. I knew they were weird. I didn't tell anybody. But they seemed huge to me. And it seemed like I had no proof. And they were the very things I most needed proof for. So in high school, I read some of Francis Schaeffer's work, in particular, The God Who Is There, and found out that my questions weren't sin, they were philosophical. And that responses to them had shaped whole cultural epochs across the disciplines, which was eye-opening to me and fired my imagination. I'm so glad that in later years I actually got to live out that dream to Geneva College. I still didn't know you could actually study philosophy. So I was about 20 when I met a student of this philosopher, Jim Greer, at Cedarville College. And that young man from Southern California, his last name was Drew, he was ecstatically telling me about all the wonderful things he was learning in his philosophy class. Well, it took me 12 hours to change my life and change my direction, transfer, study with this man, sight unseen, because what I saw was you could study philosophy, and studying philosophy is what I needed to do. It would address these fundamental questions. It would connect things. And I was sure I wasn't smart enough, but I felt morally obligated. It was like these were the most important things I had to pursue. So, like I said, 12 hours when I was 20, and I haven't looked back.
That's incredible. I'm fascinated by you saying when you were little, like how young were you when you were having those thoughts about like, how do I know God exists?
Yeah.
How do I know anything?
I think around age 13.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm fascinated by those kind of questions that children have because I've heard other people express those thoughts. Like as adults, they reflect back and they think about, I was having some pretty strange thoughts, or at least I thought they were strange. Like when, for example, one I had when I was young, I was probably around the same age, maybe even a little younger. I would often think to myself, um, okay, I have all these thoughts going on in my head, and I'm Travis, but how do I know that those other people I see are also having those same thoughts, and
Yeah.
how they're seeing out of their eyes in a way that I am? And I remember thinking I was really young, and I would think about that, and you know, it didn't really lead to much, but it's interesting thinking about, even as small children, we're thinking philosophically.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I have a new book coming out, hopefully this year, called The Mother's Smile. And
Hmm.
subtitle is Philosophical Formation in the Welcoming Gaze of Mothers and Friends. And
Wow.
I'm to the point in my life now that I'm arguing that we are kind of born into a philosophy, a natural um, philosophy, and formed in it in the encounter, the face-to-face encounter of welcome with the mother and others. And
Hmm.
so I've actually started talking about a metaphysics of childhood. The way we see reality because of our, that we're born into a face-to-face encounter. So
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I haven't thought about that. I think I would think about that usually as like psychologically,
yeah,
the attunement needed.
this in particular, the psychologists have a hard time seeing how this is philosophical. But
Mm.
I developed the ideas of a philosopher um, along these lines. Kind of went to the bank on what was said about that, and it very good. You mentioned, I don't know whether you were recording at this point or not, but my term covenant epistemology.
Hmm.
Well, that really that's my proposal of a best paradigm for knowing, and that best paradigm for knowing is the face to face mutually transformative encounter. And
Mm.
I've been working through on growing in that over my life, and I've only just recently taken the step that reality was rapturously welcoming me first. And particularly in the gaze of the mother. So
It makes me think of something that Eugene Peterson once, or often, would write about. He would say, when he's talking about prayer, that prayer is always a response to God. That it's never us like starting the conversation, it's always a response. And the way you're framing how we enter in life, it's almost like that. Like it's like life is catching you in a way, and you're
yeah,
responding to it the rest of your life.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right, and we've just in modernity, when I say modernity, I mean 1600s to the present and only
Hmm.
growing more strident. We have just dismissed that entirely. So
Hmm.
really, when you stop and think about my 13-year-old question, how do I know that anything exists beyond my apparently certain ideas in my head? That really is pretty arrogant. But it really is modern, so
Mm.
so that we really have disavowed, discounted, don't trust reality. And then, when we think of the act of coming to know, which is what epistemology is about, we tend to think it begins with us.
Yeah,
Well,
like asking questions like, um, yeah, how can I know that anything's real? Or deciding, even something like, I can decide whether or not I think God is real. Like
yeah,
those are all pretty
funny.
modern questions, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When I really think my 13-year-old questions, meaning questions I was asking at 13, were kind of in the water
Mm.
of modernity, and far from being odd. I was, I think we all share that because if we're born into the modern West, so
Hmm.
comes to expression in some form or other. So you can see how my own puzzlement kind of became my vocation.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. Amazing how God draws us to our vocations throughout life.
Yes, yes.
So you wrote this. You've written a number of books, but I've read mostly your book, A Little Manual for Knowing, and I wonder what was the main inspiration behind this particular book.
Well, the first, if I can back up, the first book is Longing to Know,
Mm-hmm.
The Philosophy of Knowledge for Ordinary People, in which that's a book written for people considering Christianity who have questions about knowing. But it obviously that was me. And so it's me justifying my own Christianity to myself. And then in the course of writing that book, I already was starting to think about what my proposal about, a paradigm for best acts of knowing would be. And I actually coined the term in the footnotes in
Mm.
Longing to Know. And, and then Longing to Know got me hired at Geneva College, which means I was like over inundated with work. And I would kind of write at it over the summers.
Mm.
Part that may be partly why it's so big and fat. So Loving to Know is about this big. And
Mm-hmm.
that is my best argument that I can give for the claim that the best paradigm of knowing is the interpersonal, covenantally constituted encounter, actually best typified by being redemptively known by Jesus Christ.
Mm.
So he becomes the paradigm. Uh, well, the problem with Loving to Know was it was big and fat. So, I've joked and said, here's the real reason it was big and fat. It was pregnant. And so it gave birth to the little skinny or little Manuel, But I also, all along, from the very beginning, Longing to Know came out, people would say to me, well, this applies to everything, It does. I mean, this is how knowing works in every field. And in particular, a business consultant said, there's a business seminar in Longing to Know,
Mm.
and I'll
Mm.
help you, think about that. So this was actually a step to get back toward a business seminar. So this, I think of it doesn't have a subtitle, but what it would be is a how-to for knowing ventures in any
Mm.
field. And so I've really built it that way. So there's at the end of each chapter are exercises for your knowing ventures. And the picture I had in mind was, um, I think it was Apollo 13, meaning the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Where here's these people dying up there, and here's this design team down on the earth scrambling and working together toward this goal. And so I had that kind of design team idea in mind. I also had uh you know freshman orientation in mind.
Mm-hmm.
um I also have always wanted to give a athletics seminar too. So in other words, people working together, jazz ensemble, choral ensemble, anything like that. So this is a short version of Loving to Know. What I do is I take eight motifs from Loving to Know, and that's just like skimming the cream. There's so much in Loving to Know that I would commend to you, conversations
Mm.
this or that person. But part one, love, pledge, invitation, and indwelling. And then part two, gift, encounter, transformation, dance, and shalom. And the other picture that's written in here is the Magi, who set out to find what's up with this star. you know,
Yeah.
that's really a journey, a pilgrimage of not yet knowing. And obviously it's a pilgrimage to epiphany and gift. So
Yeah, can you? I like that part. I felt like that story of the Magi really captures your idea about your view of knowing. Can you talk about that a little bit? How does the journey of the Magi uh, exemplify what you're talking about?
well, the first thing I would say is when most people do epistemology in modernity, they're looking for certainty, and they're looking for making sense of explanations, like giving
Mhm.
proofs and arguments to support claims. Well, because I have been influenced by philosopher Michael Polanyi, and he was a premier scientific discoverer. Discovery was his job,
Mhm.
and he was good at it. He said if epistemology concerns only certain information, if knowledge is only certain information, no scientific discovery could ever happen. But it does. And so you better fix your epistemology to go with knowing ventures, acts of coming to know, where you start like from 0 and go to 60. So there you start with not yet knowings, and then you grope your way toward figuring something out. And that's the story of our lives, is it not? I mean,
Mhm.
how much certain information do you really have?
Yeah. I was just talking about this with a couple of young guys about, man, my throat. Excuse me. A couple of young guys talking about how you decide to marry someone.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Because it's like you actually, even if you were to date for quite a while, you still have very little information about that person. And like, what will they be like when they go through grief? What will they be like when you're having financial troubles? What, you can't know all of those things prior to making the commitment. Um, and that just, stands out to me as like, when I'm reading your work, it constantly comes up. I'm like, this is very much like marriage. Like you're on a journey to know this person, but you couldn't have known all this stuff before you actually made that commitment to marry them.
Well, if I may, I have to tell you about Andrew Tyson and his wife Lillian, who are a singer-songwriting team in
Hmm.
Nashville. Who and Andrew went to Geneva, but I didn't have him. But I had other rock musicians, and so Andrew picked up Little Manual for knowing, and basically decided to live his life out of
Hmm.
Little Manual for Knowing, and got married out of Little Manual for Knowing. This is why I'm telling you this. It was like,
Wow.
so, and then Lillian joined the musical team. So there's actually I'm proud to have two indie rock albums dedicated to my work. His is called Knowing Ventures.
Hmm.
So you
I'll
can,
put a link to that on the show notes because that's awesome.
isn't it? I mean, and that just blows my mind.
Well, that's fascinating. So, to share a little personal story for me, when I was dating my now wife, we've been married almost 12 years now. When we were dating, I it was really a book that really helped me decide I wanted to get married. Um, Honestly, I'm trying to remember the name of the book. Oh yeah, it was called Sex. So, yes, so I'm not dedicating much to it, but it was called Sex, Dating, and Relationships by Gerald Heastan. And but in that book, what struck me, I don't remember hardly any of that book, other than he makes the point at some point. You know, if you're gonna get married, you actually have to get married. Like you have to go and do it at some point. You can't just like spend all just endless time wondering about it or dreaming about it. You actually have to go and do it. And for whatever reason at that point in my life, that really triggered something that was like, wow, yeah, if I want to marry this girl, I got to go and marry her. And so that was yeah, just amazing
Yep.
how, a book can put you on a new trajectory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Well,
So,
that's came of it. A wife and a daughter and a Knowing Ventures, you know, album.
yeah, exactly. Um, so what's the difference? I mean, yeah, you started getting into it a bit, like knowing is about, um, you know, reasoning or getting information or getting facts together.
Mm.
But So say more about that. Like, why are we so obsessed with that kind of knowing, like acquiring new information?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the
Okay.
issue there?
Oh, and in the manual for knowing, as you know, I distinguish the knowledge as information mindset from the loving to know mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So, so when I've taught the book, I've had students list the features,
Mm-hmm.
for the book with regard to that. So, I I by the knowledge as information mindset, I'm referring to what I think is kind of our default, our defective way paradigm of knowing in modernity. Now, why is it like that? I would say uh, it goes with our overall commitment to power and human mastery of nature, because
Mm.
it's about control and power. Francis Bacon said knowledge is power, which, if you could beat that drum for some centuries, the knowledge goes away and it's just about power, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, um, and it plays to our besetting weakness, I would say that we need to be in control, and our perfectionism or our OCD. So we feel like we protect ourselves by having control of everything. It's also, that information bits are transferable, they're commodifiable, they're scalable, all those kinds of things. So it's these little bits. So the fact is, we're in the information age. That is
Mm-hmm.
the
Of
zeitgeist,
course.
and there's nothing wrong with information, but what's wrong is a philosophy of information. So, in other words, a paradigm of knowing that is knowledge as information. And see, what I say in little manual is on the loving to know mindset. Once you figure out how knowing is actually going, what that does is actually make the information sing because you've learned to wear it, right?
Mm.
Subsidiarily wear it, and that's redemptive of information. But that you got to have a different philosophical paradigm than the one that you imbibed in modernity. And actually, as I can make this connection because of the thing I've said earlier, we actually are born into the paradigm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it predates our adolescent onset skepticism, as I call it. What's going on between the mother and child, that's philosophically paradigmatic.
Mm-hmm.
And, it also happens to go with the Bible.
Yeah. Well, what you just said makes me think of what I was preaching on this past Sunday was from Luke 13, where he's talking to the crowds and he mentions two incidents. One was this incident where Pontius Pilate killed a bunch of Galileans.
Mhm.
And then the other incident was there was a tower in Jerusalem, the tower in Siloam, that crashed down and killed people. So it was one incident was, uh, you know, uh, an evil man doing an evil act, and the other incident was an accident. And he says to the crowds, and you all wonder, were these people worse sinners because they died this way? And it's like, was that God punishing them essentially? And his response is, no, absolutely not. He says, but what you really need to think about is you need to repent and turn back to me. As you were talking, it made me think about that and think it's like they wanted more information
That
about the situation. Like what was the reasons so that maybe they could protect themselves from that happening to
yeah,
them.
that's a really good point. Yeah,
And
and
he, yeah, go
that's
ahead.
that to, I as I listen to you, that's the point. In modernity, when you look at the knowledge as information mindset, there's no responsibility in that paradigm. In other
Mm,
words, I collect information first, and then if I'm interested, I'll act on it. Which,
right.
that's two things now that you've said that had to do with taking responsibility to act, you know?
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's what it seems like Jesus is saying. He's like, no, what you don't worry about that information about what you need, what happened to them and why it happened, but instead focus on repenting, like in a sense, going back to your first and primary relationship with God and making sure that is in order. And then maybe you can have some clarity on the rest of things. But I really think that's a really, like, it starts with this relationship. And that I think is, yeah, it is often missing in our daily lives. Like, we don't think of knowing like that. We think of, oh, um, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example. What's an example of that in our daily lives now?
Well, I think we open our eyes and look around, and we totally discount what we're seeing, and we don't in any sense have a sense that it's speaking to us. I know
Mm,
that sounds weird, but, I'm looking at 2 glasses on my table right here, and it's like they're saying, "Here I am at your service," you know? And so they're making an overture. I write about this in my recent Doorway to Artistry. They're saying, "At your service," and to us, our artistic process or our act of coming to know is hospitable reciprocation,
mm,
to say, "I appreciate your service." And I know that sounds so foreign to us, but, I can commend some philosophers and other people who write this way. In fact, I think we all do. So, uh, we just sometimes need to take philosophically more seriously what we're doing those right at those
mm.
times. And you're
Yeah.
right about responsibility, you know, that you, or ownership, you take ownership in the stewardship sense of it, not in the I can do
Mhm,
whatever I want with it, but I have a responsibility to care for this house or this garden or these people or these children. And that's as you're saying, that's the main act.
mhm.
And it's also the one that's gonna lead to, greater insight. Do you know the work of Drew Johnson? D.R.U. Johnson?
No,
Who
I don't. No.
was my student, and, I'm so proud. But he has gone on, in his scholarship to pursue how knowing works in the Bible.
Mm,
So his dissertation was effectively to take my covenant epistemology and see if it actually was biblically supported. So he's
mhm,
written several works. I do commend him to you. Lots of resources there. He's really doing something pretty distinctive and powerful. But what he's going to say is, here's the way knowing works in the Bible. First, you got to choose the right authoritative guide. And
mm,
that's an act of responsibility. And then
mhm,
you got to do what they say. And then, if you're graced, you'll understand.
mm,
So, I've got those 3 sectors of clues, and he makes it more of a ritualized sort of a thing, and
mhm.
but it's very helpful.
There's almost and I know the word submission is not the most popular word, but it's like a submitting to the process of it.
Mm,
That you're like, well, I mean, like you said earlier, like in our day and age, we're obsessed with control, controlling all the factors, and submitting to something, like submitting to God and trusting Him in the journey of life. I mean, you refer to it as a pilgrimage, and I think that's just a great word, like the pilgrimage of knowing. Um, there's a real trust that that's going to work out, that
yeah,
something good is going to come out of that.
yeah. It's and, Michael Polanyi, whose work I did my dissertation on, his word was hazard.
Mm,
It's hazardous. Knowing is always hazardous, and it involves this risky responsibility, uh, for you to, like, take some steps, and it might go wrong. It just might
yeah.
go, so you have to take responsibility for that. So in Little Manual, chapter 2 is called Pledge, and, here more than other places that I can think of, I list all the pledge the things you got to pledge about in order to invite reality to come. I'm looking on page 25. The first subtitle says, "No pledge, no education." you know, it's like I just always felt on the first days of classes that the students have to say, "Okay, I'm going to do what she says, even if I don't understand it."
Mhm.
So you pledge to love, honor, and obey. You pledge to live life on the terms of the yet to be known. And so then page 29, to your point, the subheading is trust, is the
Mhm.
other side of pledge, right? You have to give yourself to trust, right? So page 30, I pledge to listen deeply and humbly to the text. I pledge faithful support to my classmates. I pledge to be patient. What's more, I pledge to allow myself to be transformed into what I am not yet. I pledge
Mm.
my troth to the reality I do not yet know. So,
That's incredible. And I think, well, that's really, I think, foreign in our world today, to think that I'm going to, even if I disagree with them, I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to obey. I'm going to submit to this process. That's so foreign. I feel like that's a really hard step on the path of humility. Like developing that virtue within us, like to be humble, means in so many ways that I'm going to put aside my own
right,
desires or my own sense of what's right at this moment. I'm going to listen to this person because I'm trusting that they've got something I don't have, and trusting that they can lead me somewhere important. And I think, yeah, that's, I didn't really see that in myself. If you had asked me 10 years ago if I was good at, like, following authority or listening to people, I probably would have said yes. Like, I didn't feel like I had a huge problem with listening to advice or things. Um, but as I've gotten older, it's become more and more apparent to me that I actually do struggle with really trusting that I can just rest in the sense that, like, that this person is giving this advice and I trust this person. So even though I don't feel like it's maybe the right thing to do right now, I can trust him, and I'm going to take this step. And I've practiced that at points, and I've really benefited from that process, because it gets you out of yourself. It gets you away from, like, your own biases, and you're like, I'm just actually going to do what this says. Um, and you're right. Sometimes it might go awry. It definitely, if you choose the wrong person. Um, but there can be a real special love and grace in it as well.
yeah,
One thing we practice at our church is um, covenant membership, and so when I have people coming to the church and they're interested in being members, I talk about it like this sense of, like, well, you're functioning as a member already. Like, you're doing things, you're active, you know people. But the membership, like the public moment, is your time to make a vow to
yeah,
us
yeah,
and give us the opportunity to make a vow to you that we're in it together now. Like, we're here for each other. And
totally.
that's a different, I try to, like, really emphasize that point. I'm like, this is an unusual thing we're doing here, but it's so good, because how often in life do you get that chance to, like, for someone to promise, like a whole community to promise that they're going to take care of you? Yeah.
Well, when I talk about my work, uh, I see that what I'm doing actually is not teaching people a new way to know. I'm helping them see what they can't help but doing in life. And so it's like I relay the accents
Mm.
on underscoring the things that they do so they can actually see what they do. So they tend to think that what they're doing and knowing is collecting information. But
Mm.
everybody's got a pledge, quite honestly. And if there's going to be a successful knowing venture, it's going to involve that, whether they've called it that or not, right?
Mm.
So it's there. In fact, can you connect the word pledge to the word covenant? So when I talk about covenant epistemology, I just use
Hmm.
word pledge in Little Manual for Knowing. But where I learned that was reading Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, where
Oh, yeah.
she talks about how to see a muskrat.
Mm-hmm.
She calls it stalking muskrats in that chapter. It's pretty famous. And, what I listen, she said, if you want to see a muskrat, you've got to surrender your dignity and you've got to sit very still for a very long time. And you may not scratch your nose. And so what I heard as I'm reading this is, my golly, this is covenantal self-binding. That's what she's doing. She's binding herself covenantally to live life on the terms of the yet to be known. The muskrat is in charge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I said, you know what? This is covenant language. And oh yeah, I was teaching at Covenant Seminary, and I was teaching, a course called Covenant Epistemology, but I used it too because of Annie Dillard, but also at that time, Bill Clinton as president was using the word covenant. So I thought if he could, I could, so that people would have some purchase on that. But this sense of, you want to learn Hebrew, you've got to go to Hebrew class, and then you've got to do the exercises. You have to.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so the role of the authoritative guide. One guy I had at seminary was a second career, he was studying for the ministry, but he had been an F-16 fighter pilot.
Hmm.
Said, tell them you cannot fly an F-16 fighter jet without an authoritative guide. You simply cannot do it. So I think we're quite used to submitting to authoritative guides. I mean, if you're going to be an
Mm-hmm.
athlete, you have to. You just have
Mm-hmm.
to. Or a musician, and you've got to submit to them actually naming to you your very bodily sensations. You have
Yeah.
to. And that's like everywhere. So like I said, you're already doing it. I'm just showing, I'm just relaying the accents so you can see what you've already been doing successfully in knowing all your life. Don't call it collecting information.
Mm. Right.
I mean, what collecting information is you're gathering it as you submit to living life on the terms of the yet to be known. So
Mm-hmm.
in Polanyi's work, he talked about subsidiary focal integration, and it's this artful subsidiarily relying on that you need to do, like you surrender yourself to a bike, to
Mm-hmm.
trust the bike to engage the world. Well, that's, so you collect information, but you also have this pledge stuff going on, and all of that is your subsidiarily indwelling to invite reality to come.
Wow. That's a great, I love that. I hadn't thought about it like that. Like there is such a, yeah, when in so many areas of our life, we are submitting to these authority guides. I like how you call them authority guides. I think that's a really good way to put it. Um, I mean, and it's countless. We're constantly doing that.
In fact, we can
Even,
step out of the matrix of authority, I think.
no, yeah.
It's
I
it,
mean,
you're choosing this or you're choosing that, Are you choosing yourself or are you choosing somebody else?
yeah. I mean, even I think about like how we interpret the day's events, like in the news. Are, people tend to be pretty loyal to whatever their news source is. And that's their authoritative guide. I mean, whether it's the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or NPR or some random person on YouTube, I mean, it's like, they get really loyal about it. I always remember Anne Lamott. I was at one of her talks once, and she said, she grew up every day they would read together the inspired word of the New York Times. um, and that was like their scripture in a way. It was their authority, and I just thought that was so funny the way she put it. And but yeah, we do that. And it's like, so why? Do you have any, ideas about why, when it comes to spirituality and faith, there seems to be a resistance to that? Like, I mean, I feel like in our cultural milieu, there seems to be a sense of like, we want a spirituality with no authority. we want to decide on our own terms. We want to be our own authority when it comes to spirituality.
Well, I would commend to you my other books. But see, part of the deal is in developing what we call the modern,
Mm-hmm.
that involved essentially rejection of several things, including authority. If you go back to Descartes and Bacon, I mean, the whole point is you don't submit to authority.
Mm.
And so that has blinded us. We think we're doing what Father Bacon said, the
Mm-hmm.
knowledge is power thing. Well, and we discount the authorities that we rely on.
Mm.
You know? So that Michael Polanyi has a really riotous paragraph, can't remember where it is, where he says, this idea that we verify things for ourselves, said, well, first of all, they wouldn't even let you in the lab. Second of all, if you perchance got inside, you would break the equipment. And if you succeeded not to break the equipment, you wouldn't know how to do the test. And if
Yeah.
you managed to do the test, your data ought to be discounted because it'll be wrong and you didn't know what you were doing. So it's a very, and okay, again, just connect that with like align that with other things you do. So I would love to be able to play the piano like the geniuses in the rest of my family. But part of the problem is I haven't sat myself on that bench for all my life like the geniuses did. You have
Mm.
to pledge to live life on the terms of the yet to be known, meaning the piano, meaning the music, all those things,
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
and then after maybe decades, you might invite a concerto to come.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
What's the
it's like,
problem? We do it all the
well,
time.
yeah, it's like during COVID, actually. Like, you know, people would be like, well, how can we know for certain? There was all this outrage against like the CDC and um, all the people just the experts telling us what to think about COVID. And I remember when I would be in these conversations where people were like, how can we know, how can we trust that they know what they're talking about, et cetera. And I would always be like, well, I mean, I have to trust they know what they're talking about because I sure don't know what they're talking about. Like, I don't know the answer. I'm no expert on um, diseases and viruses, so I've got to trust the people who have spent their life working on that in order
Well,
to
and
get
you
those
see,
answers.
what we have to do through life is choose wise guides. So
Yeah.
if you think of the book of Proverbs, multitude of counselors, not just one news source,
Hmm.
right? And could it take a lifetime to figure out some scientific stuff? Well, yes. Why should we think it was instantaneous? Right? So yes, we want to trust the people who have been at it for decades. Why?
Hmm.
Because that's the only kind of pianist you would listen to, right? I mean, it's somebody that's been at it for decades. So
Hmm.
why should we think that the wisdom should be instantaneous?
Hmm.
And yes, so I could devote my life to epidemiology. I don't have time because I've been doing philosophy. So I've got to figure out the epidemiologist that I'm going to listen to for now.
Hmm.
But that's not to, you know, be like totally blind to it, but you're always open to other voices. I mean, this is just prudence, a la Proverbs, how you navigate life. And it's really irresponsible. It's irresponsible to just like turn your brain off and listen to one whatever. I mean, that's
Hmm.
just how can anybody think that?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
Right?
we need that as one of my professors once put it, we need a good cloud of witnesses, he would call it. We need
Yeah.
to, surround ourselves with people who we can rely and trust on. So when you, so going back to this covenant epistemology, when we find those guides, those authoritative guides and we trust them and we rely on them, is that the knowing venture? Is that that relationship between us and the guide? Is that what you're trying to get at here? Like, is that what we have to remember is the kind of the crux of knowing is what's going on between them?
Uh, it's not the guide. The guide is a piece of it.
Okay.
The thing as kind of the that too is the yet to be known. So um, it's a reality. Okay.
Mhm.
And so, if I were inviting, if I wanted to figure out how to play a particular piece on my guitar, right? I'm thinking of one student I had who did this. He fell in love with a piece some band played, and so he hadn't even ever picked up the guitar, let alone
Mm.
taken lessons. Took him 2 years of lessons. So, in order to get to play that song, he got a guide, right? He took lessons.
Mhm.
Right, so the guide is somebody that's kind of with you in the journey, and so it's about the knower yet to be known relationship, where it's you inviting the real, and what, Polanyi said is all knowing is this from to integration. You always are relying on and indwelling clues subsidiarily, that was his word, to focus on, to spy and shape a pattern that when it breaks in graciously, we then submit to it as a token of reality, because reality opens up in all these wonderful possibilities.
Mm.
But in Longing to Know, and Longing to Know is the book where I lay this out the most fully. So I do
Mhm.
commend the book to you. I mean, it's in chapter 4 in a little manual, but
Yeah.
it's throughout the book in Longing to Know. Um, what I talk about is in Polanyi's subsidiary focal integration, there's 3 sectors of clues. So there's and in Longing to Know, I call it the world, so the place of my puzzlement, my situation. Then my felt body is one, and then the authoritative guide, I call it the directions. So those 3 were kind of triangulating. I know that's not what the word means. Between those, groping along. So if and the knowing venture could start in any one of them. So if I have to take a calculus class. I got to get an A. And I walk into that room, my body's scared, scared. But what I'm doing is I'm clinging to the word of the authoritative guide.
Mm.
But then other ventures in life, you can just have a bad feeling in your body. I love the Han Solo line in Star Wars. I got a bad feeling about this.
Yeah.
you know, there's sometimes when the venture just starts with something in your body saying, "This isn't right. This
Mhm.
isn't right." And you need to attend to that. And then the third one is the situation. You lose your credit card. Yeah, right. That's a problem in the situation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right, and so you're scrambling to make sense of the world, so all 3 of those just interpenetrate. I got this actually from theologian John Frame. I don't know if you know who
Oh,
he is,
yeah, I know him. Mhm.
but that's the Framian triad, you know,
Oh, wow.
but it's true, you know, and so, you it doesn't just start with the authoritative guide. It doesn't just start with my body. It doesn't just start with my situation. In a way, what it starts with is reality wooing me
Hmm.
and saying, "Here I am." And I start to scrabble toward it. So people, who are geologists at one point got loved by a rock. you know, they just fell in love. They fell in love with a
Mm.
rock. So the first chapter in little manual is called Love. You know,
Mm.
so it begins with that, and then I start to scrabble. I try to make sense of it, my situation, my felt body sense, the authoritative guides that are speaking into my life, And then I'm just working creatively, subsidiarily with those three interpenetrating sectors of clues to grope toward the aha moment. The thing, though, that happens is when you have an aha moment of insight or discovery, an epiphany, as we say,
Mhm.
what that does is it transforms everything that we were relying on. So, you know, at the point that I started groping, nothing added up. Nothing made sense. And then I actually have to, you think of the word clue, which is a clue. A clue is a half understanding. You need an account of epistemology that makes sense of clues. That's effectively
Mhm.
what Polanyi was saying. So
Mhm.
how it is that you can trust yourself to something that you half understand, that then when you get to the aha moment, actually you now understand it in a way that you didn't before. The road to Emmaus is a great example of this, right?
Mhm.
I mean, later they say, "Did not our hearts burn within us when he talked with us on the way?" Well, that was body clues. They were burning. Their bodies
Mhm.
were burning, and so their bodies knew something bigger was up, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, they're looking at him. They didn't even recognize him, until he broke the bread, which they would have seen him do a whole lot, right? And he's saying, Jesus is the authoritative guide to the scriptures at this point, He said,
Mhm.
you said to them, "Didn't you know what the scripture said?" And even then, they don't get it until he breaks the bread. Is that
Mhm.
fantastic? And then see the integration is, oh my gosh, this is Jesus. He is alive and Jesus lives and so shall I. It's like it
Mm.
transforms the world. Everything is transformed. Now that's an aha moment.
That's fantastic. I think that's a great place for us to pause and stop our episode. I wish I could keep talking to you because there's so much here. I feel like your your work is really uncovering an important element of knowing that I don't think many of us have thought about. I mean, even just as you were just finishing, I thought, oh, and the knowing of oneself is also relational and being attuned to your own, how many people are not attuned to those feelings that you have inside you that are giving you signals and they just suppress them or ignore them. And what if the reality that's calling out to you is God, and God wants to get your attention and you're not paying attention to all the clues? I love that. It's so good. It
Well,
does.
this
Oh,
has
go
been a
ahead.
lifetime journey that I would recommend because it's so fun. I mean, it's just turned into just sheer joy. So,
Yeah.
so there's some books I commend to you, and
I'll put a list of the books on the show notes and make sure it's available to everyone. Um, but yeah, really appreciate this conversation, and hopefully I'll have you back in the future, and we can keep it going.
well, thank you, Travis. It's very nice of you to reach out to me and have me on your show.
Yeah, of course. Glad you. I'm so just thankful that you gave us a bit of your time.
Mm, very good.
Well, that's a wrap on our conversation today with Dr. Esther Lightcap Meek. I hope this discussion has given you a fresh perspective on what it means to truly know, whether it's in our relationships, our faith, or how we engage with the world. Esther's insights challenge us to move beyond mere information and into a deeper, more personal way of knowing, one that invites love, humility, and transformation. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out her book, A Little Manual for Knowing, and explore more of her work. And as always, if this conversation resonated with you, share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe to the Faith Informing Podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take good care.